Welcome to the Water Shelf Podcast, where we dive into the wonderful world of water books. The Water Shelf is a production of Maven's Notebook, California's Water News Central. My name is Justin Scott-Coe, water manager, pirate, and book aficionado. More information on the Water Shelf and Maven's Notebook will be provided at the end of this episode. It is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Shimon Anisfeld to this Water Shelf podcast. Dr. Anisfeld is Senior Lecturer 2 and Research Scientist in Water Resources and Environmental Chemistry at Yale University. His two primary areas of interest are coastal ecosystems and freshwater management, the latter of which is the subject of his new book, Water Management, Prioritizing Justice and Sustainability, published this year by Island Press, which I encourage everyone to buy. Additionally, he has created a website associated with the book, watermanagement.yale.edu, which I encourage everyone to visit, and I look forward to talking a bit about that as well. Shimmy, I am thrilled to speak with you about your exciting new book.
Thank you so much, Justin, for inviting me. I appreciate it.
My first question, before we get into the book's actual content, is really kind of how you came about to write this incredible book. Water management presents itself by heft as well as a scope as a college or university textbook. But you say in the preface that you also hope that it will be a helpful resource to water management professionals like myself. So how did you come to write Water Management? Whom did you consider to be in its intended audience, and whom do you most want to read this book?
Well, I guess I've been teaching water management courses at Yale and kind of being involved in the water management world as an academic for decades. And I published a previous book, much shorter book, like a primer on water called Water Resources, as part of an Island Press kind of primer series on different environmental topics. That was published in 2010. And I was teaching from that book, and increasingly it was out of date, and I knew a lot more about water, and I wanted to really find a textbook that I could use in my water management classes, and there wasn't such a textbook that worked for me anyway. So I wrote one, so on some level it is a follow-up to that 2010 book, but as you say, it's greatly expanded in kind of scope and style. I will say it is on most basically a textbook for my students and other water management students, but I was trying to write it and price it in a way that other people could afford to buy it and would be interested in reading it. So the other audiences, I would, to be honest, secondary audiences, but I think really important audiences are, as you said, water professionals who know a lot about how to run a water utility or whatever field they're in, but may kind of want a little more kind of overview of the water world in areas that they're not necessarily specialized in. And then the third, so that we got students, we have water professionals, and then people I sometimes call kind of semi-professionals, people who are not necessarily professionally involved in water management, but are interested lay people who maybe are serving on a conservation commission or a board of some kind, where they need to understand this stuff, or they're just interested in the water crisis and they want to know more about it. So those are the three audiences.
I find that fascinating because those are such three so important audiences for the water conversation. Both, we sometimes talk in the water profession that we're only talking to ourselves. We need to talk much more broadly, and I'm sure in the academic area as well as more generally, it's important to have that education as broad as possible. I also found that your book fit wonderfully into all of the different other water books that are kind of coming out, as well as historical water books that I'm gaining familiarity with the Water Shelf effort. So I was wondering if there was a particular book or books on your, so to speak, water shelf, either virtual or actual, or outside the field of water that inspired you to write or inspired you while you were writing Water Management. And I'm also curious, having never taken a water management course, how your book compares with other academic textbooks in the field of water management studies. You started to talk a little bit about that in first your own textbook, but also other textbooks in the area.
Yeah. Well, first I want to say, Justin, I so appreciate the water shelf. It's really a great service to the community. Both the podcast and the reviews and the list of top 20 and so on, because there are so many great water books out there, and it's really a burgeoning field of different aspects of water. Um, I'll mention three books that I was reading when I was really starting to work on this book. Um, all the books on your list are really great books, but I want to stay away from that list and introduce some new books. I think Rivers of Empire by Donald Worster, a great history. Cadillac Desert is probably more widely read, but Rivers of Empire is really worth a read. So just that sense of the importance of water in shaping civilization, especially in arid places, but really also in wetter places. The second one is City Water, City Life by Carl Smith, which is kind of the other side. It's the urban water, whereas Rivers of Empire is mostly about irrigation, mostly about agriculture. City Water, City Life is about the amazing transformation that city water, that is water imported as a public good, and treated and delivered to customers, from some distance away in some cases, right? The way that changed cities and made them what they are today. And then the third book I'll mention is Water Ethics by David Grunfeld, which really points to the importance of values underlying this. We have these institutions and this infrastructure for managing water. We really should be thinking about what values it is supposed to be serving and what values it actually is serving. And that's a point that obviously Worcester also makes really strongly. So those were the three. Okay, I gave you a long answer to the first part of your question. The second half of your question was, how does this fit into the world of water management textbooks? In my experience, the water management textbooks have a little too much water science for me. They are about half or more of them are really what I would call water science, which doesn't leave quite enough room to get to the management issues. My assumption in my book is that people have some understanding of water science, basic hydrology and water quality. I do have on my website kind of a primer, so people who are not familiar with those kind of basic concepts can catch up. And then I do have a chapter at the beginning about the importance of variability in water supply and because that's directly a management issue, clearly, and climate change. So I have some science in there, but I think it's a little more oriented towards how do we manage these systems compared to some other water textbooks.
Thank you. Oh, were you done? I'm sorry.
Well, I just wanted to add one more thing really related to the previous thought, because you were saying about we were talking about the audiences for this book, and you pointed to the importance of lay people really being involved in this conversation, because water touches all of us, right? We are all consumers of water. We all pay for water in one way or another. We all eat food that takes water to grow. So I think it's a kind of under-publicized environmental issue. It's getting more and more press. And I think that's warranted because fundamentally we live in a democracy, and we're all ratepayers on one way or another. So the public needs to understand these issues.
You're speaking to my heart, my public water agency heart.
Exactly.
I absolutely agree, and I think it's something that we can all be working in partnership and getting out the message of how important a topic is, and how there's different perspectives and people really need to think about. And I really appreciate those books. I'd heard of Rivers and Empire, but the City Water, City Life, and Water Ethics, I'm definitely going to have to look up. Thank you for that. And before we get into the kind of the meat of the book, a few questions on that. I had to ask, writing this book must have been a monumental undertaking. I mean, where do you even start? Just kind of practically, do you start with kind of your class notes? You mentioned your prior book, but what is kind of the process of writing a textbook like this? And how long does it take? And just kind of curious.
Yeah. Well, on some level, I started writing this book on some level when I finished the previous book in 2010. Not really, but I started immediately. That book was, as I taught more and more and learned more and more, I wanted to update that book pretty quickly. But in writing this book, I didn't start from that book. I really started from my class. I started from this class that I've taught every year, probably for about 20 years now, an introductory water management class. I also teach some more kind of topical advanced water management classes. But the introductory class gave me the chance to really think about how students best absorb this material, how to structure it in a way that kind of logically walks through the different aspects of water management, and to the extent possible, doesn't leave anything out, right? And that was one of the things I was really hoping to do with this book is be holistic, kind of look across the range of water management issues. So, yeah, so I started really from the class.
It reads as if you're taking the class, and in a very good way. I love taking classes, this was a tremendous benefit, and really well organized. It made me want to take the class. So let's go into the book itself, and it's a textbook. It's about water management, but right in the subtitle there is a prioritizing justice and sustainability. There's a point of view as well, strongly stated. So I was wondering if you could summarize what would be the thesis or central argument of water management as a book as well as a textbook.
Right. So I think that is, if I had to pick an argument, it would be that we, and thank you for noting that we have not paid enough attention in our water management to justice, to underserved communities of various kinds, and to sustainability, to thinking about the long-term health of our water systems, and not just our human water systems, but the natural water systems that are, after all, the fundamental foundation of our human water systems. So that's the basic argument. But I also think that I think I have a fairly light hand in that argument, because in the book, because I think what I really want to do is give people rather than making an argument, I want to give people the tools to understand the debates. And so unlike a lot of water books, I'm trying to back up a little bit. I'm not so much making an argument as giving people resources and tools and skills and information to understand the underlying issues. So I know people read, articles in the Times about water issues. I want them, when they read those articles, to kind of understand where what's underlying that, and to be a little more comfortable with actually the nitty-gritty of the jargon that we use in the water management world. So it's almost like a translation exercise. It's, again, rather than an argument, it's giving people tools. And I think the other thing that I think characterizes it, which again, it's not really an argument, but I could phrase it as an argument. If I had to, I would phrase it as water is interconnected, which is sort of an obvious statement. But it goes back to the kind of holistic nature of the book. I'm trying to cover water across different disciplines. So I'm drawing from engineering, I'm drawing from hydrology, but I'm also clearly drawing from, political science and sociology, environmental justice. So, I'm not an expert in all those fields. I'm not an economist, but I do know enough to teach students the basic economics of water management. So all those disciplines come to play. So in that sense, it's holistic. And in the other sense is that really it tries to cover all the different issues, and that's impossible, of course, but to try to not be just about, water supply for cities, not be just about water for agriculture, not be just about cooperation and conflict, not be just about dams, not be just about climate change, navigate, is trying to look across the range of issues. And recognizing that different places have different kinds of water problems, right? Water is local, water problems are local. But I think you might say that now water knowledge is global, right? So we now can look across the world, understand what works, what doesn't in different settings. And this book is meant to help people do that, to learn lessons from one sector or one place that could potentially be applied in another sector or place.
I think that's one of the most fascinating aspects of water is that it's so hyper local and yet so global in terms of approaches. I find many books are kind of playing with that intersection. I just interviewed David Sedlak, his recent Water for All book, where he really tries to address that situation and actually identify solutions in one area of the world or one area of water management that can be applied in another area where there's challenges. It's fascinating. I found one of the and maybe this is typical in water management courses, but I've never seen it before. I love the structure of your book where you divided almost like magisterially water uses into this in-stream versus off-stream water uses. And I've always heard those terms before, but I never thought of it that conceptually. It reminded me, I work in the Western United States where riparian and appropriative water rights is tremendously important. You cover that in another section, kind of a in-between section on water governance. But I was wondering, does the division of water management into these two major categories of in-stream and off-stream uses or issues, does that help to prioritize justice and sustainability? Is that a good way of looking at it? Is it a new way of looking at it, or is this a more of a standard way of looking at it?
Interesting question. I did play around a lot with the structure, and I had the very tangible experience of water. Everything is interconnected, so breaking it into neat sections and chapters was difficult. And I settled on this structure again after trying out different structures in my course, especially, and finding that this was a kind of a logical flow for people. And I think that distinction between in-stream and off-stream is pretty common in the water world, I guess. I find it helpful, again, partly to make sure that we're covering both, because like if you ask people what are water problems, some people will immediately point to dams, levees, flooding along rivers, endangered species in rivers, all the things that are about rivers and aquatic ecosystems. And other people, if you say, what's a water problem, they'll say, well, Flint, we don't have clean water coming out of our taps, or this, drought, there's not enough water to grow food. And people tend to look at one or the other. The first is really in-stream, which is really just a fancy word for river management. And then the second is, once we take water from a river, what do we do with it? How can we use it more efficiently? And of course, the main point is those are linked, right? And the water that we take from the river isn't in the river, and therefore can't support endangered fish and can't support recreation downstream. So understanding that our off-stream water use comes from dams and from river, fundamentally from aquatic ecosystems, is critical for making that sustainability link.
Yeah, I absolutely see that. Makes perfect sense to me. It's one of those aha moments I had when reading your book, which I very much enjoyed.
I'll just add, can I add one more thing on that point?
Oh, please, yes.
Like, I'm particularly interested these days in kind of the invisible environmental issues, the ones where we are all consumers, but we don't see the upstream impacts. And I think, virtual water, the water that's embedded in our food especially, but also in our consumer products, is one really important aspect of that. I feel like part of the goal of the book is to help make the invisible visible, so that we can know the impacts of our eating, for example, know the impacts of our water management and how they ripple beyond the immediate dam or in the river or the immediate agricultural field. So
an example of that to me that I learned from the book was about green water versus blue water, the water that's actually inherent within the soil. It's just that was another truly aha. I learned a great deal, as you can tell from reading your book, taking your course, so to speak. In your book, you align yourself pretty straightforwardly with Peter Glick and others critical of the view of or you take a critical view of the infrastructure heavy, what's called a hard path approach to water management, and state a preference to at least start looking at more in depth a soft path that is not so concrete heavy. Two questions that, this is a long-standing conversation, and I've seen two questions often raised, or I've raised them myself. The first is, can a soft path achieve the sufficient scale to address all of the water management issues that you identify and others identify arising due to climate change? We're going to be dealing with a lot of water management issues, and does the soft path have enough oomph to help us deal with those? And the second is, what do we do with all the existing hard path infrastructure, the dams, the canals, and the other hydraulic superstructures that we've put across the earth? And I was wondering if you were able to address those questions in your book, as well as how they can be addressed in the classroom and even in the professional field.
Yeah, those are the key questions, aren't they? And I think I do believe in the soft path, but I don't believe that we should totally forsake our hard path infrastructure. Certainly don't believe that. I think maybe I push harder on the soft path because there is so much momentum still behind the hard path. Even though everyone is giving lip service to the soft path, I think we still have a lot of economic, political momentum behind building large concrete structures around the world, right? Large hydropower dams going up at a really amazing pace in biodiversity hotspots that are going to have impacts on people and ecosystems that are going to be felt for a really long time. So I'm trying to push back a little bit against that momentum. And I think one thing that we have to realize about the hard path is it works very well until it doesn't. And part of the reason it works very well is because of massive energy subsidies, right? So it is only the fact that energy is cheaper than it should be, read climate change, right? That we can build these structures and move water, uphill and across miles of desert, hundreds of miles of desert, right? So there are costs, the most obvious being the energy subsidy, but also river depletion, tribes losing their cultural and historic rights and connections to fish, to salmon, etc. Those are costs that are built into the hard path, but we're not paying yet, or at least some of us are paying, but not all of us are paying, right? So I guess I would not argue at all for tearing down every piece of hard infrastructure tomorrow, right? Our cities and our agriculture are reliant on these. But I would argue for building in more hybrid approaches, for green stormwater infrastructure, other ways of storing water besides large dams, and where appropriate, taking down dams that really don't make sense anymore. There's lots of dams that have come down with really positive ecological and social benefits, and no real significant loss in terms of the ability to provide water for people. Now, that's not going to be the case everywhere. You could call those exceptions, but we know it can be done in certain places, and I'm just trying to push us a little bit in that direction.
Right. Great answer. And just really points to the challenges of our past activities, but also our future challenges that we're going to have to face, and what the tools are going to be for those, including, learning from those who came before us, who we may have left behind their management techniques that we need to now learn from, or, almost in an archaeological sort of way. Yep. You cover so many different topics in the book, from flood management to, water governance, dams, as you already mentioned, into the urban water use environment, industrial use, agricultural use. And I can imagine it's very difficult to teach all of these different topics all at once and put them in the book. And I found one of your techniques that I really enjoyed were your conceptual diagrams, which are very simple and yet incredibly effective diagrams as far as explaining a complicated area in a one look, or a useful sort of way that you can kind kind of explore. And one I mentioned in my review of your book was about and you basically, in one diagram, you were able to show conceptually every possible planned and unplanned way that wastewater is reused as a water supply. I was so impressed. How did you develop these diagrams? Is this a classroom technique, or was it something you developed for the book itself? Just curious.
Yeah, I think I'm fundamentally an educator. So I do spend a lot of time thinking about how people learn and helping people understand complex topics. Often is best done with good graphics. So I try to do that. I will say that I have a lot of graphics that didn't make it into the book that I think are helpful to people, and I'm gradually building up this website. I'm hoping to make some of those resources available to people. The other thing just about that particular graphic of the wastewater reuse, again, I think it's a kind of example of how we compartmentalize. Like wastewater reuse in California looks very different than a farmer in the global South who is using untreated wastewater because that's their only source of nutrients and water. So it's important to put those in the same diagram and then think about what are the risks in each of these. How do we move these systems towards more sustainable and just solutions ultimately, while recognizing the different regulatory and development contexts.
We often find, people kind of latching onto one particular solution without understanding the kind of the broad context. And I think it's helpful to be able to understand all the various options and paths, and then the more immediate institutional opportunities and constraints, right? That apply in a particular area. Absolutely. You mentioned the website, and I wanted to just touch on that if we can. You mentioned that the website is really an opportunity to expand on the information as new information is developed or new issues are presented. That the website can be provided for updated information. One emerging field that just kind of occurred to me, because it's in the news a lot, is the increasing water demand of data centers, particularly associated with the ballooning use of artificial intelligence. So how do you cover emerging issues such as this in a textbook, providing a broad overview that provides also a broad overview of water management principles? And how does the website help to do that?
Yeah, it's a central question for anyone writing a textbook these days, right? Which is, you publish a textbook in 2024. Is it useful in 2034, right? Or even before then, it may be out of date. So I think there's one thing I try to do is articulate what I think are general principles that are going to hold into the future. So understanding the distinction between blue and green water use, between consumptive and non-consumptive water use, those are kind of fundamental principles that you need to know. AI doesn't change that. And then the second thing is to update, right? And I do think the website is going to be a great resource for that. I'll just say, I think the website, the way I think about it, has kind of three functions. One is just to provide educators and students with the materials from the book in an accessible form. The whole book isn't on there, but all the images from the book are on there so that instructors don't have to, so they can get a high resolution image that they can use in their teaching. The second function is what we were just talking about, which is to update. And so I have a sabbatical coming up. I'm hoping to, write something on data centers, and
excellent,
which is mentioned in the book, but not at the level of detail that it deserves. And then the third function is the fact that this book, even though it is, as you said, rather long, it is actually about half the length of the manuscript that I originally submitted to Island Press. So there's a lot of material that didn't make it into the final version that I like, case studies, deeper dives into particular issues that I really would like to get on there as resources for teachers and students, freely available to help people understand water management a little better.
Well, it's very exciting. A kind of an evolving process of this book being used and expanded upon and developed. I'm kind of stepping away from the book a little bit, or thinking about, going forward. How do you see your book being used by students who become water management professionals, kind of carrying what they learn forward into the water management area? How will they apply its principles and the prioritization of justice and sustainability in the workplace, whatever workplace they find themselves in?
Yeah. So um, I think on some level it's an introduction to a career in water. It's not by any means. I mean, people will learn on the job. I'm not. I have no illusions that my course is going to give them everything they need to know for their whole career. It's just a starting place. And it's also maybe a reminder of two things: a reminder that even though you're going to be working in one sector, in one place, on one kind of issue, that is expand your horizons once in a while. Think about what's going on in other places with water and recognize that interconnection. And secondly, that remember that the way we've done it in the past has often left out some really important groups, right? And that did not have voices at the table. And we have to change that. And those groups, include, people of color, indigenous people, rivers themselves, fish, these the non the groups that were not present when a lot of these decisions were made need to be really accounted for and need to have a voice now. So that's something that I think will be really important throughout their careers.
Absolutely. I mean, there's some topics that, we end up facing all the times, including the ones that you raised. One is about affordability as water, in the urban side, but also on the agricultural side becomes more expensive, industrial side even. How does it change people's, personal economics as well as more general economics? It's a fascinating area. Well, I wanted to end just a couple of questions. First, you mentioned some books at the beginning that inspired you, but I'm kind of curious, what books do you see water management in dialogue with now that it's out there on sort of the virtual water shelf or on a non-water shelf, on any bookshelf? Are there specific books that you think pair well with yours, go well together, or that you see in dialogue, reinforcing or challenging each other's arguments? Just curious.
It's a good question, and I'll mention, I think, two books that, again, all the books on your water shelf, your virtual water shelf, are really in. I'd love my book to be in dialogue with them, but again, I'll try to mention two that you don't have on your top 20 anyway. One of which is a water book called Water for All by Sarah Hines. The subtitle is Community, Property, and Revolution in Modern Bolivia. It gives kind of the backstory of what we're all familiar with, the Cochabamba Water Rebellion in the year 2000. But it's a deep historical anthropological dive into one case. So I think I'd like to recognize that my book is really broad and not deep. It's an overview, it's a textbook, and people need to pair that with deep knowledge of a particular place. And so this is just an example of that.
Fantastic.
And the second book that I would put on that shelf would be Grand Transitions by Vaclav Smil, Smil, which is not just about water. The subtitle is How the Modern World Was Made. And I love these histories that kind of help reveal, make the invisible visible. We all drive our cars. We all, go to the grocery store and buy food, most of us. And we don't think a lot about how much energy and food and information have changed over the last century and beyond. So the kind of that deep historical understanding is another dimension of depth that I think is really important. And I do some history in my book. I wish I had time to do more, but this is a really great overview of these, civilization-making transitions with their strengths and their weaknesses, their costs.
And you point out in the book that we are in need or in process of what you call a just transition, in moving water management into that process. And I can see understanding those transitions in the past helping us enter into that or better formulate a good just transition moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
My last question is just how has your book been received? Have you has it been, are you using it in your own classroom? Or other people using it? Are you starting to get a sense of where it fits in with the general dialogue out there?
Yeah, it's still pretty young, so I have not gotten a lot of info yet from the publisher on sales or adoptions. So I think my main feedback so far has been from students and colleagues. And from students, I did teach my water management course this past semester, and for the first time used the book, and I think students really liked it. I have them write weekly reading responses as a basis for a classroom conversation, and they had some really interesting thoughts in response to each chapter. So I feel like I succeeded there. And from colleagues, generally positive. I mean, who's going to tell me they didn't like it? But I've gotten some nice feedback. So.
Well, fantastic. Well, please consider my feedback to add on to that. It's just an amazing book, wonderful book. I enjoyed it. It is a course that I think me and many of my colleagues should take. It just gives such a broad scope of understanding of where everybody involved in the water field, which is everybody, because we're all made of this stuff, how we interact and hopefully better manage this incredibly important resource. So I will just end by thanking you, Shimmy. We've been speaking with Dr. Shimon Anisfeld about his recently published book, Water Management, Prioritizing Justice and Sustainability, published by Island Press in 2024, available wherever you find books. And I strongly urge you to pick this one up. It is, as Shimmy mentioned earlier, not only a textbook, but a reasonably priced textbook. If I remember prices of textbooks, this one is at least half off, and I appreciate that, and I'm sure everybody does. But really, what we appreciate is the ability to put so much knowledge into between two covers, as well as expanding through the ongoing dialogue in classrooms and workplaces, and hopefully dining rooms, as well as online. So thank you, Shimmy, so much for being on the Water Shelf podcast.
Thank you so much. This was a really interesting conversation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Water Shelf. For water book news and reviews and to sign up for our newsletter, please visit the Water Shelf website at mavensnotebook.com/watershelf. Maven's Notebook is the place to stay up to date on California water news and information. Subscribe to weekly or daily emails at mavensnotebook.com. Finally, please support authors by filling your water shelf with their amazing books. Buy them at your local bookseller and let me know what you think. Until next time, thank you for listening and happy water reading.